Welcome back to Wealth of Words, a show where we really get into some thought-provoking books.
Yes.
I'm Richard,
And I'm Isabella.
and we are very excited to dive into a book today that honestly really challenges how we see the world.
I'm so ready.
So today we are opening up Factfulness.
Yeah.
10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think.
Ooh.
This book by Hans Rosling and his children, Ola and Anna,
Yes.
argues that, despite what we often hear, the world is actually getting better
It is.
in a lot of ways.
It is. And in fact, one of the things that makes Factfulness so interesting is that it uses data, hard data, to back up these claims.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
did you know that in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world living in extreme poverty has almost halved?
Wow, that's incredible. That's like the
Yeah.
opposite of what we usually hear on the news.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's because, as Factfulness points out, we as humans have these ingrained instincts that can really distort our view of the world.
Oh, interesting.
Rosling calls them dramatic instincts, and they can lead us to some pretty inaccurate conclusions about the world.
So let's break down these dramatic instincts then.
Okay.
What are some of the ones that you think are the most relatable or the biggest, trip-ups for us?
Okay, well, one that I know I fall into, and I'm sure you do too, is the negativity instinct.
Yeah.
That tendency to focus on all of the bad things and
Yeah.
to overlook the good.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in, the news cycle, which is always highlighting the problems, and we very rarely hear about all the progress that is being made.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Factfulness argues that this negativity bias isn't just annoying, it can actually lead to some pretty bad decisions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because if we're constantly being bombarded with negativity, we might start to believe that things are worse than they actually are, and this can lead to fear and apathy or even misguided policies.
That makes sense. So how do we combat this negativity instinct?
So one of the key things is to be mindful of the sources that you're getting your information from.
Okay.
Are they presenting a balanced view, or are they cherry-picking data to fit a certain narrative?
Right.
You should also actively look for some good news.
Okay.
Celebrate those wins, even if they're small.
I love that it's like you're retraining your brain to see the positive.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's not about ignoring all the problems. It's about having a more realistic and balanced perspective.
For sure. So negativity is one.
Yeah.
What are some other dramatic instincts that we should watch out for?
Okay, another one that I think really skews our worldview is the gap instinct.
Okay.
And this is that tendency to divide the world into two distinct groups,
Uh-huh.
like us versus them,
Yeah.
or developed versus developing, without recognizing that big spectrum in between.
Right. It's that assumption that everybody in that category is the same, which we know is not true.
Exactly. And Factfulness shows us how this gap instinct can lead to some pretty inaccurate assumptions about global issues. For example, we might assume that everyone in a developing country lives in poverty,
Right.
which just isn't true.
Yeah.
There's a vast middle class emerging in many parts of the world, but that nuance gets lost in our simplified view of things.
Yeah. So how do we stop ourselves from falling into that trap of the gap instinct?
You need to look beyond those categories and see the nuances.
Mhm.
You know, the world is complex and people's experiences can vary widely,
Yeah.
even within the same country.
Totally. It's like reminding yourself that everyone has their own unique story and their own unique circumstances.
Exactly.
It's not fair to just lump people into these broad categories and assume we know everything about their reality.
That's so true. And, you know, that brings us to another point in the book.
Yeah.
That's about data visualization.
Okay. So how does that come in?
Well, Rosling argues that how we present data can really impact how we understand the world. Remember that image he uses? The one with the 4 income levels.
Mhm.
It's not the simple developed versus developing picture we imagine.
No, it's not. That one really stood out to me because it shows a much more complex picture
It does.
of global income distribution with this big hump in the middle representing that rising middle class.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how a simple visual can challenge our assumptions and help us to see the world more accurately.
Yes.
And that's a key takeaway from Factfulness. Data can be a really powerful antidote to those dramatic instincts.
So it's not enough to just be aware of our biases. We need to actively seek out information that challenges those biases, even if it's a little uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads us to another really important theme, humility.
Okay, and how does that play into all of this?
So Rosling argues that even experts who dedicate their lives to understanding global issues
Yeah.
can still fall prey to these dramatic instincts.
The books are human.
Exactly. So it's not about being perfect.
Yeah.
It's about being open to learning and being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Right, having that humility to say, like, I don't have all the answers.
And constantly updating our knowledge as we go.
That's a great point to kind of wrap up this first part of our deep dive into factfulness.
Oh,
We've uncovered some of those dramatic instincts that distort our view of the world.
yeah.
And we've talked about how the book challenges us to really confront those with a more fact-based approach.
It does. And I think we've only just scratched the surface.
For sure.
Welcome back to our deep dive into factfulness.
Yes.
We've been talking about all of those dramatic instincts that can really,
You here?
warp our view of the world.
Yeah, it's been so eye-opening to think about how these instincts can affect everything, like from our personal decisions to global policies.
Yeah, it really can. But the good news is factfulness doesn't just focus on the problems.
Right.
It also offers us some solutions.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, Rosling calls them factfulness habits.
Okay.
And they're basically these strategies for developing a more accurate and less stressful worldview.
I'm all about less stress. So tell me about these factfulness habits. What are some that we can start to incorporate into our lives?
Okay, so one that I think is really important,
Yeah.
and that we touched on earlier, is being mindful of the sources that we're relying on for information.
Okay.
So, before you just accept any dramatic claim,
Yeah.
ask yourself, who is saying this? What's their agenda? Is this information coming from a reliable source?
It's like we have to become much more discerning news
Yeah.
consumers than we used to be,
Yes.
especially with, misinformation spreading so quickly.
Exactly. And it's not just about being skeptical about everything you hear.
No.
It's also about recognizing your own biases.
Okay.
Factfulness reminds us that we all have these preconceived notions about the world,
Yeah.
and these biases can really influence how we interpret information.
It's about being honest with yourself,
Uh-huh.
about where your own blind spots are,
Exactly.
and being willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Absolutely. And, another factfulness habit that can help us do that
Okay.
is controlling our comparisons.
Okay, what do you mean by controlling our comparisons?
Okay, so it means being mindful of how we're comparing things.
Okay.
So, often we make these comparisons
Yeah.
based on really incomplete or biased information,
Yeah.
which can lead to some distorted conclusions.
Do you have an example of that?
Sure, so think about how we often compare countries.
Okay.
So we might say country A is much richer than country B based on their GDP.
Right.
But that comparison might be ignoring the historical context. Maybe country B has made really significant progress in recent years, but we don't see that if we only focus on the present.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's like comparing apples and oranges, right?
There we
You had
go.
to look at the full context
Yes,
to make a fair comparison.
absolutely. And another really crucial point is remembering that progress often happens gradually.
Okay.
We tend to focus on those huge leaps forward, but real change often happens in small incremental steps.
So it's like that saying, slow and steady wins the race.
Yes, exactly. So think about something like literacy rates.
Yeah?
The global average has skyrocketed over the past century,
Yeah.
but that progress didn't happen overnight.
Of course.
It's not. It happened slowly over time through all these dedicated efforts
Yeah.
of countless individuals.
Right. That's a good reminder because it's easy to get discouraged if you don't see results immediately.
Yes, it is.
But we need to remember, these things take time.
They do, and that's why it's so important to celebrate those small wins. Recognizing progress, even if it's not perfect, is so important to maintaining a balanced perspective
Yeah.
and avoiding that negativity trap.
Yeah, it's like giving ourselves permission to be optimistic
Yeah.
about the future while still acknowledging that there are problems that still need to be solved.
Absolutely, you got it. It's about finding that sweet spot between acknowledging those challenges, but also recognizing that progress is happening. The world is not black and white. It's full of all these different trends happening at the same time.
Speaking of complexity, one of the things that really stood out to me in Factfulness is that it encourages us to use data to reduce stress, which seems a little counterintuitive. Wouldn't data just make things more complicated?
It might seem that way at first, but think about it. When we make decisions based on our gut feeling,
Yeah.
dramatic headlines, we're making those decisions based on fear and anxiety.
Okay.
Data can help us see things more objectively.
So it's like, instead of being lost and wandering around,
Yes.
we have a map.
Exactly. Data can help us see where we are, where we've been, and where we might be going.
Right. And that can help us to make better decisions,
Yes.
feel more in control.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really inspiring message in Factfulness.
Right.
The power of human ingenuity.
Ooh, I like that. It's like we have this incredible capacity for innovation and problem solving.
That's right.
And we put our minds to it.
We do, and Factfulness shows us so many examples of how human ingenuity has really led to some amazing advancements in healthcare, technology,
Yeah.
and countless other fields. It's this reminder that we have the power to solve problems, to make the world a better place if we work together and focus on the facts.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like Factfulness manages to be both really realistic, but also optimistic at the same time.
Right.
It doesn't sugarcoat anything,
Uh-huh.
but it highlights the progress that has been made. And that gives me a sense of hope for the future.
Me too. And I think that balance is really important. It helps us acknowledge those problems without losing hope. Progress is possible, even in this really chaotic world.
So as we get ready to wrap up, I want to talk about how we can take these insights and apply them to our own lives.
Yes, let's do it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Factfulness. It feels like we've been doing a lot of unpacking in these last two parts. We talked about the book's main arguments, those dramatic instincts, and of course those really practical factfulness habits that Rosling lays out.
We did.
But now I think we get to the really exciting part,
Yeah.
putting it all into practice.
Yes, using it in our own lives.
Exactly, because what good is all this knowledge
Right.
if we're not actually using it to make better decisions and live more fulfilling lives?
Right. So how do we actually do that? How do we take these factfulness habits and make them part of our everyday life?
Yeah.
One that really stuck with me was being mindful of where we're getting our information from.
Okay.
You know, are we really getting our news from sources that value facts over, sensationalism?
Right.
Are we letting those online algorithms trap us in echo chambers where we're only hearing things that we already agree with?
Yeah, I've been there. I've definitely been sucked into those negative news cycles.
It's so easy to do.
And you get addicted to the drama, even though it's not really making you more informed.
Right. But Factfulness encourages us to be more intentional about our news. Find diverse perspectives and fact-check those crazy headlines.
Yeah.
And watch out for anything that just feels overly dramatic or manipulative.
Yeah, like you're being in control of what you consume rather than it controlling you.
Exactly.
Another thing that stood out to me was that emphasis on celebrating progress.
Yes.
It's easy to get caught up in all the problems in the world and forget to see how far we've actually come.
Yeah, we forget to celebrate all those positive changes that are happening right now. Factfulness reminds us to celebrate those wins, even the small ones, because that keeps us moving forward.
Yeah, it's like we need to enjoy the journey and not just focus on the destination.
Exactly.
Another interesting point I wanted to bring up was that idea of using data to reduce stress. Now, I know that might sound a little weird.
It does.
But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense.
Yeah, when we just go with our gut or rely on those dramatic headlines, we make decisions out of fear.
Yeah.
But if we look at the data, we can make better decisions.
So instead of reacting emotionally, we can be more rational and think things through.
Exactly. And I think that brings us to one of the best messages of this book, that progress is possible.
Yeah.
There are a lot of challenges in the world, but we've gotten through a lot before and we can do it again.
It's like, we have the power to change things. We're not just watching from the sidelines. We can create a better future.
Exactly. And Factfulness helps us do that. It gives us information, but it also gives us hope.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it such a powerful and important book.
I agree.
It helps us see the world in a new way with more compassion.
Yes.
And ultimately to do things that actually make a difference.
Yes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Factfulness, I want to leave you with a question. What is one area in your life where maybe you're letting those dramatic instincts take over? What's one step you can take today to see things in a more fact-based way?
That's a great question to think about. And remember, having a factful mindset doesn't mean you'll never be wrong. It just means you're willing to keep learning, to challenge your assumptions, and to use knowledge to create a better future for yourself and for the world.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Factfulness. We hope you learned a lot and are inspired to embrace that fact-based worldview.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.